Good evening, class. We're going to talk this particular night about aircraft maintenance, and hopefully this will be helpful so you can go back and review a few things or hear a few things again if you need to. But we're just going to run through it again, kind of like we did in class. I'll try to keep it relatively short, but make sure to talk through everything here. Okay, so first, the definition of PIC. So when we went through part one in the introductory PowerPoint, we talked about the definition of PIC mainly being the final authority of the aircraft. So whoever is appropriately certificated and rated, and they are um, I guess because of the final authority, they're PIC, right? It can also be defined as someone who solely maneuvers the flight controls. So, for instance, it isn't really possible for a student pilot to be considered PIC, but the fact that when you guys go on your solos, nobody else is in the airplane and you're the only one who can maneuver the flight controls, you are then by default the PIC. So it's kind of a legal loophole and it's weird. Ask some of your instructors about double logging and all of that, right? Getting dual received time plus PIC time once you're a private pilot, and how complicated and messy that makes your logbook. Another confusing, I guess, instance of PIC is when when you're doing things with a safety pilot. So if you're doing instrument stuff and you have to be under a view limiting device, the person who is under the view limiting device is PIC according to the definition that they are solely maneuvering the flight controls because they're doing the flying. But the person who makes sure that there's no traffic out in the area can also be PIC, because if you can't see what's out, out beyond the aircraft, and somebody else has to sit there and do that for you and do the scan, as long as they are appropriately certificated and rated, they are also PIC. So a lot of times when people want to log PIC because they need it, they will put themselves in that exact scenario so that both people can legally log the flight time, right? So there's one person who is the sole maneuverer of the flight controls, and another person who is the final authority because they're the ones who are able to see the traffic. So it's really weird, but the way that I want you guys to think about it is just the fact that you're the final authority, right? So when we as instructors try to get you guys to think PIC thoughts and do PIC things and make PIC decisions, what we want you to do is to adopt that thought process, right? That you are the final authority and you are the one who determines the safety and the final outcome of the flight. Okay, because one day that will be your responsibility, right? When you go on your first solo, that's your responsibility. And then once you get your private pilot certificate and you're either going by yourself or you're carrying some people, some friends or family with you, you are again PIC, right? And then further down the line in your career, you will definitely be PIC. Okay, so some things to think about. So when we think about PIC things and making PIC decisions, one of the first areas we start from is the area of airworthiness, right? So we need to know what airworthiness is and all the things that affect it. So there's mainly four pieces to airworthiness. The first of which being documents. So there has to be official documents inside the aircraft that are legally required in order for it to be airworthy, right? We as PIC also have to determine that the general condition of the aircraft is in good shape for flying. If it looks like an airplane, sounds like an airplane, smells like an airplane, it's probably okay in terms of that, right? But that's not the whole shebang, right? So documents, general condition, required inspections we need to be sure that those have been done. So those are going to be in the maintenance logbooks. And then airworthiness directives have to be followed, and those are also in the maintenance logbooks. Okay. So when we talk about inspections and things of that nature, there's a couple of units of time that we should really understand. A calendar month is almost like a normal month, except for the fact that it carries over to the end of the month. So right now I'm sitting here as the 2nd of March. If I don't know, if there's an inspection that needs to be done in one calendar month, that is not saying that the inspection is due on the 2nd of April, but rather the inspection has to be done sometime in the month of April. So you have all the way from the 1st all the way to the 30th of April. And that is one calendar month from now, right? If it were the 28th of March, one calendar month from now would still be that same time frame. So anywhere from the beginning to the end of April. So when we go ahead 12 calendar months from today, which is again the 2nd of March, 12 calendar months ahead is March 31st. I believe they're 31 days. March 31st of 2025. Okay, so that's calendar month. Tachometer time, or tach time like we call it, is another unit of measurement for inspection time frame. Tachometer time is a meter, or the tach is a meter that shows not only your RPMs, or revolutions per minute, but also how much time that engine has been running for. So as soon as you crank that engine up, right, and it turns over and is running, that tachometer is gaining time. Okay, so sometimes there's a number of hours between one inspection and the next that we have to observe and respect. So calendar months and tach time. With that being said, let's move on to documents. Remember, AARO is the acronym that we want to associate with this, right? So we have Airworthiness Certificate, registration, both state and federal, radio certificate for international operations, operating limitations, and weight and balance. So the Airworthiness Certificate, remember, is a little piece of paper that must be in view to the occupants of the aircraft. For us, it's kind of down in that pocket, but it's in that clear sleeve and it's in the front so that it can be seen. This airworthiness certificate accompanies the aircraft from the factory. It's released by the manufacturer. And the airworthiness certificate itself, remember, does not expire. There is no expiration date on it. It's not like a registration that has to be annually renewed or anything like that. However, if the aircraft does not have the airworthiness certificate in it, then it is an unairworthy aircraft. If the airworthiness certificate is inside the airplane, that does not guarantee that the aircraft is airworthy. So even though it is an airworthiness certificate, that is not a guarantee, right? Because there's something else, or there can be something else outside that scope of documentation, or even within the documents, that's not present that compromises the airworthiness. But if you want to have any shot of that aircraft being airworthy, you need to have the airworthiness certificate. Okay. So I'm not going to go through the story again. Registration. Two types are required in the state of Illinois. So federal registration is good for 7 years. So this time it's not calendar months, it's 7 years. And that's, of course, nationwide, right? So wherever you are, you have to have the federal, but you also have to have a state of Illinois registration if you reside in the state of Illinois, right? And this is every 24 calendar months for renewal. Okay, so both of those are tucked behind that airworthiness certificate in that clear packet down by the pilot's feet. Not every single state, remember, has the additional registration, but we do. So make sure that that document is in there before you go flying. Otherwise, again, the aircraft is not airworthy. Radio certificate, remember, this is just for international ops. So if we leave the country, we need to have this with us. But we aren't going to leave the country, hopefully, right? So we don't really need that. Operating limitations comes in the form of either a POH or an AFM, or an approved flight manual. And this is usually in a binder that sits either in the back seat or in the pouch behind the pilot or the co-pilot side. And inside of this, you'll find a number of things usually. You can see on the front of this particular POH, the serial number and the tail number for that particular aircraft are written in there. So these are specific to that specific airplane. Even if you have the same make and model, you can't just like switch these out. Okay, so you got this in there, so make sure the binder's in there. And then also, if you're flying a G1000, the user manual for the G1000 system needs to be in the airplane. The comprehensive equipment list lists a particular place, like in that pocket down by the pilot's feet, where it needs to be, but it's usually not there, and that's not a big deal. It just needs to be in the aircraft for airworthiness purposes. All right, last is weight and balance. So this is usually going to be in that binder with the POH or the AFM. And again, this is specific to each aircraft. Here on the left, you've got two different 172R models. One of them is the steam gauge, the other is the G1000. With the G1000, you've got a lot of electronic equipment. The steam gauge, not so much. So the overall weight and the distribution of the weight and the center of gravity and all of that stuff is not going to be the same, even though just looking at the outside of these airplanes, they would look exactly the same. Even if they are exactly the same, if they're two G1000s or two steam gauge airplanes and their tail numbers are really close, like 5 for 6 alpha and 5 for 9er alpha, that does not allow you to switch the weight and balance between them, because sometimes there are things we can't see that have either been added or removed. Okay, and the weight and balance is such a big deal because that influences the overall behavior of the airplane. And again, there are legal limitations as to weight, right? So everything has a maximum weight if we're talking about leaving the ground. So the weight and balance is important to the point where we can't just switch it out. And every time something is either replaced or moved in the aircraft, not like you moving your backpack to the back, but if there's a component that gets moved or something, then the weight and balance needs to be redone. So it's pretty strict. Okay, so AARO, remember airworthiness certificate, registration, radio op certificate, or radio operator certificate, operating limitations, and weight and balance. Those are your 5 things. Next, again, I don't think I should spend that much time on this, but you should be able to at this point, if you've gone on 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 flights, you should be able to have a general idea of what the airplane should look like and how this pre-flight inspection goes. So you should have a good idea of your responsibility as PIC. So again, here's an example of a checklist, right, for the R model. Those are the things you're going to look for, and make sure that if there's anything you're not sure of, please ask about it. Sometimes we want you guys to get done with the pre-flight in kind of a timely manner, but at the same time, we don't want you to rush and miss the stuff or not ask about stuff that concerns you. So don't think that there's any such thing as a dumb question when you get done with the pre-flighting. Um, please ask questions. Sorry, I had like a antivirus window pop up. Go away. Okay, moving on. A little quiz about airworthiness. So some pictures of some aircraft that are probably not airworthy. Okay, so you can go through those on your own time. So when you don't find the aircraft unairworthy, we talked about the squawk book and all of that, and it gets downed in Talon, right? So nobody flies it. You don't have to actually do anything. You don't have to fix it, right? Because the owner operator is the party that is responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the airplane. So all we have to do is communicate to SIU or the School of Aviation that the plane is, not working or something's wrong with it, and then they will attend to it when they can. If it is your own aircraft, then the situation's a little different, right? Because you own the aircraft. So now you are responsible for all of the airworthiness. Sometimes that means you are responsible for taking your airplane to a service station or something that is able to run the inspections for you or fix certain things. But there are some things that you don't have to do that with. Some things you can do yourself. It's very much like owning a car, right? And this is what we call preventive maintenance. So if there's small repairs or replacements or things like that that you want to do to save a little bit of money, and you know what you're doing, you can do that. Okay, so things like changing tires, oil, right? You can put more fluids in the aircraft. You can inflate a tire. You can replace a tire. You can replace a landing light. All of that is perfectly legal under the preventive maintenance section, right? So this is in part 43, and it's an appendix, and paragraph C is literally titled preventive maintenance. So it has a list of all the stuff that you can do. The only caveat, though, is you must be at least a private pilot. So right now, none of you are eligible for preventive maintenance. Even if you do own your own plane, you can help somebody out who is certificated, as long as they're the ones who oversees the whole thing and they make the signature at the end of the day and the description and everything, the entry in the logbook. Okay. You could also if you have a mechanic as a friend, they can help you do even larger tasks outside of preventive maintenance. And the only caveat again is that they just have to basically oversee your operation. So they have to make sure that you're doing the right things. I don't know how many mechanics would be willing to do that, to kind of spend some time doing that. Most of them probably want to just do the inspection or the replacement or the repair or whatever and just be done with it. But that is a possible thing. Okay. All right. I'm not going to go over SOPs. All this says is if you're going to do something to your airplane, then make sure that you at least leave it where it was or make it better. Right? You can't make it worse. Major things, mechanics need to handle that. So again, if you're owner operator of an aircraft, you're responsible for taking your airplane to get it fixed by somebody else or having them come in and fix it, but you can't actually do any of these things. So whether it's a major or minor repair, you can't do those. Okay. Now, once the maintenance gets done, and this is for any type of maintenance, there has to be an entry in the logbook to show that it's been done. And this is not a logbook for flight time or anything. This is a maintenance logbook, and it's a big, thick binder that has different actual books inside dedicated to each of the parts of the aircraft or the major parts. So you've got, for instance, 3 in our logbooks and most logbooks for general aviation aircraft. So you've got airframe, propeller, and engine. When things are done to any of these things, right, there are 4 things that need to be entered into the logbook. So you've got a description of the work, so what was done, the pilot signature, a date that it was done, and then their certificate and certificate number, right, to make sure that they are appropriately certificated and rated to perform whatever maintenance they completed. So over here on the left is an example from the logbook of 549er Alpha of looks like a phase 2 inspection, which if you guys remember, that's kind of the second stage of the 100-hour that's broken apart. But it says complied with phase 2 inspection, right? There's a date over there on the left. There's even a TAC and a Hobbs time, which is kind of cool. Replaced instrument air filter, complied with AD, so airworthiness directive, and it gives a number for that for the engine air filter. And then let's see here. It's due at a certain time. Replaced cowl mount. So they did a lot. There's a service bulletin that they complied with. They did a lot. So there's a description of what they did and the dates and everything. And then at the bottom, you can see that it was signed. Now, the person who did this works here at the university, and we are a repair station as a whole. So that's why there's no certificate number for them specifically, but they are registered under the repair certification number. So you can see that there's like an identification number for that for us. So if you're independent, then you would need your pilot cert in here or your what am I trying to say? Your maintenance certificate. Okay. Okay, so we learned about Aero for documents. Aviate is for inspections. So here are all the inspections we should be able to find in the maintenance logbooks. We have the annual inspection, which is every 12 calendar months. We've got the VOR check, right? We've got the 100-hour inspection, which, surprise, surprise, is done every 100 hours. We have the altimeter static system check. We've got the transponder check and inspection and the ELT. So all of these regulations are where these particular checks come from, just so you have some reference. And yes, Part 43 is about maintenance, but sometimes there are general operating rules about how often that maintenance should take place that is displayed in Part 91. So that's why all of these regulations come from there. But again, if we look in the appendices for Part 43, it has all of these specific criteria and scope of inspection for all of these inspections. Okay, so actually how to do them is in 43. The regulations on how often they should be done, that's all in Part 91. Most important thing is the annual. The annual is a big inspection that takes a while depending on the size of your aircraft. So again, there's the appendix listed for that inspection. But this most important thing to remember is it needs to be done every 12 calendar months, and it has to be done by a mechanic with an IA or an inspection authorization. Somebody who works for the FAA can do that too. Remember, the administrator is the FAA. So they're going to check pretty much everything. They're going to take everything apart. I was told a story not that long ago about us taking our aircraft because our maintenance department is so bogged down because we don't have that many people anymore. Us taking our airplanes up to another facility at another airport, and we actually had to, I think, go somewhere else to get the annual done because this particular facility said they did the annual, but they didn't do the annual. And the way that we could tell that they didn't do it was because the factory paint was still attached around some of the coverings and openings to the rest of the airplane, which says that they did not remove those panels, which is expected for an annual. So they didn't do that. So now we had to find somewhere else to get it done. But yeah, annuals are important, right? So we wanted to make sure that we didn't break any of those regulations. We're finding another place. So every 12 calendar months for the annual. The VOR check is every 30 days. We don't really need that at this point, but I would say go ahead and memorize this as part of the acronym because this is important information for a few days or a few years down the road, maybe a year or two. I don't know. If you stay over the summer, that makes a big difference, right? But you will need this for instrument. So every 30 days for the VOR check. I'm not going to go over the ways to check the VOR. I have a slide about VOR operation, just so you're not in the dark about what a VOR is and like what it provides us and a little bit about how it works. If you want to go over this on your own time, that's fine, but we don't have to worry about this just yet. This will show up at sort of the end of the course when we get to cross-country planning. Next is a 100-hour inspection. So this is one of those that is off of TAC time. So when 100 hours of TAC time go by, we are expected to do the 100-hour inspection if we are operating for hire, right? So that is the main thing. If you're just flying your airplane and you're not making a single dollar off of it, you're just doing it for fun or to get your hours and move on, then you don't need the 100-hour done. But if any way, shape, or form you're making money off of that aircraft, you need the 100-hour done. So if you're carrying people from place to place, that requires a 100-hour inspection. If you are carrying property like cargo or anything like that, you're getting paid for that, right? Then that's also an operation that requires a 100-hour inspection. If you are flight instructing out of your personal plane, that is an operation that requires a 100-hour. So you what am I trying to say? You can be 1000% sure that we're doing the 100-hour here at SIU, right? Because we are taking your money and teaching you how to fly and all the ground knowledge and everything. So if we're using the airplanes for that, we have to get the 100-hour done. Now, with the 100-hour, let's say we don't have facilities at our airport to do the 100-hour and we have to fly elsewhere to get it done. If we are already at 100 hours of TAC time or close to that at that point, and we go over that 100 hours to get to a place that can do the 100-hour, that is okay as long as it is equal to or less than 10 hours over. Okay, so if we are going on a 3-hour trip to find a place to do the the 100-hour inspection, and we are going to be, I don't know, 2.5 hours over, totally fine because we're going to get another one done. It's just that now we have to subtract whatever that overage is from the next 100-hour inspection. So I said 2.5 over, so now we would expect the next inspection to be done at 97.5 hours of TAC time from this current inspection, if that makes sense. That was kind of a bad example because I have a decimal there, but I hope that's clear. So 100-hour altimeter static system test and inspection. Again, this is one that is not required for VFR ops. If you are operating under IFR, you need it done every 24 calendar months. Most of our airplanes get this done. I think the one exception might be the 152s because we don't do any instrument stuff with that at all. But we might also get it done for that. I'm not really 100% sure. But 24 calendar months for this. If you want to know what this test looks like, feel free to check out Appendix E in Part 43. But just know it has to be done, right? It has to be logged in the maintenance logbooks. Next is the transponder test and inspection. So this has to be done every 24 calendar months as well. This one is required regardless. So transponders, remember, are tools that tell ATC where we are and how high we are, so that way they can keep us separated from other traffic. Most airspaces need or require a transponder as part of your equipment, so really you're not going to be able to go anywhere, or not many places anyway, without a transponder. So this is a test that is pretty much required. So every 24 calendar months. The ELT is the last one. So the ELT is a little bit more often. It's 12 calendar months. The really nice thing about our inspections here is that the ELT, you will more times than not find it with the annual. So if the annual has to be done every 12 calendar months, they might as well knock out the ELT as well. The ELT is in the aircraft to just basically emit a signal if there's a suspected crash. Right, so if there's a huge force felt, then the ELT is going to go off and basically tell guard where you are so they can come find you. Okay, so every 12 calendar months for that. The battery inside the ELT is also important. It's kind of a separate matter, but if that battery has been used for at least an hour of cumulative use, and what this means is that it doesn't have to continuously be on for an hour for the battery to need to be replaced. But if it's on for, I don't know, 5 minutes one day, 20 minutes another day, and then if it eventually adds up to an hour, then that is when that battery needs to be replaced. So either that, or if half the useful life of the battery goes by. So if, let's say we go get an ELT inspection done today, and they put a fresh new battery in there, and it says that it expires in, I don't know, March of 26, then next year, so March of 25, which is half that time frame, is when we would have to get another battery put in. So they don't want to take any chances. And then the specs down there about not needing an ELT in some instances is just kind of like a fascinating thing, right? So if you are getting an ELT replacement, or it's getting repaired or something like that, you can actually go 90 days without an ELT as long as it's logged in the maintenance logbooks, right? There should be a placard in the airplane saying ELT not installed, and then an entry about why you don't have an ELT for those 90 days. And then if you're doing just training flights within 50-mile radius of origin airport, so like what we do, except for cross countries, would count for that. But we have ELTs and we get them tested like we should. Okay, so the phase inspection program is a way to cut down on aircraft downtime. So we have a lot of students who need to get done, right? We have to get through our flight training. So the less time that our airplanes can spend downed is better for the students and better for us as an organization. So we've applied for the phase inspection program, looks like a number of years ago, so almost 10 years ago. And the FAA has approved it, right? So they wrote this letter to Mr. Bergner, if you know him. He was our director of the School of Aviation, but he stepped down since. But anyway, you can see that the letter approves our enrollment of 549er Alpha in the phase inspection program. So what happens with the phase inspection program is it's a combination of the most time-intensive inspections in order to basically pare them down to less downtime. So the 100-hour and the annual are the most time intensive. I'd imagine it wouldn't take that long to test an ELT. Altimeter static system might take a little bit of time. Transponder probably doesn't take that long. But the 100-hour and the annual do, because they are done to a very detailed scope. Right, so there are three phases that those two inspections break down into. And you might be saying, 3 phases? Well, isn't that like a little bit less efficient than, just the 2 inspections? Well, not really, and you'll see why, right? So phase 1, all they have to do is look inside the airplane, look at the parts and everything. It's just a visual inspection once 50 hours of takt time go by. And then a phase 2 is, again, that same visual inspection, but it's a little bit more detailed. They might take a few things apart here and there to make sure that they work properly and that all the parts are present, but usually that one doesn't take that long. So if it's down for a 50 hours, we call them, because they're done every other 50 hours, right? So 50 hours goes by, we do phase one, another 50 hours goes by, we do phase two, another 50 hours goes by, we do a phase one. I should be an auctioneer, right? Why am I teaching? I should be an auctioneer. But anyway, that goes back and forth, right? It doesn't take much time for them to do either of those. The time intensive one is the phase three. So that's a phase two plus an annual. So phase two is like, again, kind of like half the 100-hour inspection. And then we're adding that to the annual. So this happens every 12 calendar months or 600 hours tack time, whatever comes first. Okay, so essentially, it could be done a little bit more often than an annual, but it can't be done less often than an annual would be done. Okay, so in this way, we somehow save downtime so you guys can fly more. Don't ask me about what's happening right now. All I know is we don't have as much maintenance personnel as we used to. So that's why things are down a little bit more. My example, hopefully that's helpful in the math of that, right? So the phase one happens if we have like 9.3 tack time, add another 50 hours, it's time for phase two, add another 50 hours, it's time for phase one, add another 50 hours, it's time for phase two, and then that keeps going back and forth after every 50 hours until we get to either 600 hours, so that's 609.3, or the 12 calendar months. Whichever comes first, the phase three happens. Okay. Additional things to be concerned about are airworthiness directives and service bulletins. So service bulletins are basically things or recommended checks that the manufacturer puts out because there are issues that they know people are having with their aircraft. So the seat rail example, remember I talked about in class, Cessna put out a service bulletin to make sure that people were checking these, because what would happen is people's seats would not be held by the seat rails because of fatigue over time, and then their seat would slide back when they pitched the aircraft up on takeoff, and then out of response, right, or out of reflex, they would grab the flight controls, pull back, bringing that nose up and stalling the aircraft really close to the ground. So once that killed a number of people, remember service bulletins, they don't have to be done. So if you get sent out a service bulletin, you can totally rip it up and ignore it like it's junk mail. Okay, but if that problem becomes a really big problem, then the FAA is going to step up and say, hey, you need to do this this inspection because we are releasing it as an airworthiness directive. Okay, so those you can't rip up and throw away, those you have to do. Otherwise, the airworthiness of your aircraft is compromised. Okay, so both of these things are found in the maintenance logbook. They're kind of in the back of the maintenance logbook, but they're there. And again, if you're asked on check right about them, the service bulletins don't have to be done, so I wouldn't spend time looking for those if you're trying to prove airworthiness because they're not required. I would look for the ADs, right? And like we saw, if I backtrack here, like we saw in that entry for 549er Alpha, there it is. You can see that there are a couple of ADs that they did during this phase two inspection, right? So AD 842602, whatever that is. And they even did a service bulletin too, right? There's a service bulletin, I think 112402. Looks like they crossed another one of those out or something. But you have to not only find the page for the actual AD, but you also need to go back to the date that it was done on that page and find it in the maintenance logbooks here and see where it says that they complied with that AD. So if I found the sheet about AD 842602, and this was the most recent time they complied with it according to that sheet, I would go back to this page in the maintenance logbook and look for this, right? Complied with AD 842602. Okay, so they did that on this particular date. So that is the actual proof that they have done that particular inspection per the required airworthiness directive. Moving on. If your aircraft is unairworthy and you can't get it fixed at that location and you have to fly it somewhere else, the FAA, through the local FSDO, which is the Flight Standards District Office, the closest one for us is Springfield, Illinois, they can issue you a temporary airworthiness certificate, or what we call a ferry permit, so that you can fly the airplane to the destination so it can become airworthy permanently again. Or not really permanently, but I don't know. a little bit more longevity on the airworthiness. Keep in mind that, remember, USPIC, you are responsible for the safety of flight. So you have to determine that whatever is not working is not going to pose a problem to your flight. Make sure that it is disconnected or placarded inoperative so you don't think that it's working and showing you something and then you follow an indication and you put the safety of flight in jeopardy. But make sure that it is safe, right? Because that is your job as PIC. And then once you've got that ferry permit, you can take it somewhere to get it fixed. Okay. Again, as always, let me know if you have any questions. Obviously, you can't let me know right now, but send me an email. You can even send me a text or stop me in the halls when you see me. Come to my office, right? Office hours are happening whenever I have time. Don't be fooled by my closed door, right? I might very well be in my office. So if you have questions, just knock and ask. Okay? But that's it for this PowerPoint.